Yeah, so we are from the Nonprofit Association of Washington, and we work to support and advocate on behalf of the over 25,000 nonprofits in Washington State. We also have member organizations that get special resources and other things, but we really do attempt to support all nonprofits in Washington. And you know, our basic idea is that we think that we're stronger together. So we do a lot. We do a lot together. We try really hard to listen to our communities and figure out what nonprofits need and what's going on with them and how we can support. Yeah, we basically do three main things. We do learning events where we talk about all kinds of things. We have the basic ones that are about board and finance and legal for nonprofits. But then there are also these opportunities to learn a lot about emergent issues in the nonprofit sector. One of the big things we do is put on the Washington State Nonprofit Conference. So I hope some of you will join us there. It's May 17th through 19th. First 2 days are online, and then the 19th will be in Tacoma. But there'll be some exciting things going on there. Another thing that we do is help folks collaborate and get together. And so we have some informal, mostly online right now, get-togethers of different groups. We have an ED coffee hour, where executive directors can get together and kind of network and those things. So that's a lot of work we do. The other big leg of the work we do is advocacy. And we love all of y'all's missions and support them. And the thing that we focus on mostly is issues that support the nonprofit sector broadly. So things that go across kind of issue or even not just social services, but arts organizations and all of that. And so yeah, that's basically what we do. Okay, and to get us all excited and learning, we're going to do a little bit of trivia. So this is interactive, so you can use either your laptop or your phone. But you'll want to, for folks online, they'll want to make sure they still see the Zoom screen. So I recommend using your phone if you have it handy, but they can also have the two. I think it was hard.
So on your phone, you want to go to venti.com, and in a second, we'll have a number for you to punch in to venti.com. So we're going to start.
Yeah, just click on. Are you just going to online?
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so Venti.com.
I don't even know we have a QR code. That's
Yeah, the Venti.com.
Yeah.
I don't see the.
No, we're gonna get a code.
Yeah, what happened to the code? You know the code? Yeah, hang on.
Reach from here to see that.
I don't know how it's.
You could just zoom in on the camera and then it should pop up. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's just kind of cut off at the top. So the code is, if anybody needs a code, 2885-0097. One more time. 2885-0097. Okay, it looks like people are figuring it out. Anybody need any troubleshooting tech support? Okay.
On purpose, I sat by these smart guys.
There you go, just copy that. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna jump in. It's just a few questions about kind of the legislature, how things work. first thing that's gonna happen is a question is gonna pop up there. I'll read it to you and you'll just see the question on your screen and then the answers will pop up. The goal is to get the right answer. And if you do it quicker, you get more points. And they're a little treat for the winners, so.
Good shot.
Okay, here we go. Okay, that's not great. Okay. Nope, it's giving us the answer. What's happening? Is it in,
Yeah, I think someone has to be in presenting.
well, I think this, we want that to be in
Be logged in.
presenter mode.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
I can see you all in there though, that's great. I don't.
I'll do something. I just read.
Whatever you did a little bit ago actually pulled up a prompt for me to add a name, so.
Can you quickly just stop sharing on here and then see if you,
I mean, it's on.
on there,
Because we'll see it all.
so then you won't see it up on the screen, you'll see it on your own screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have all the.
Are you logged in?
So please stop sharing. So
Yeah.
that we will go out with the Android.
Okay.
And then, somebody just share the feed, if that's okay.
So I guess, yeah, I'll be part of the folks that are on the screen, but we'll keep you up to date. So this is all of y'all that are logged in right now. It's like cute little thingy. And you could change your name on the. Sorry, doing this backwards.
All right.
Okay, all ready? Anybody paying attention? Okay, so you'll get. Okay, I got it. See it on your phone. We'll do some announcements about who's in. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so a lot of people were paying attention when I was, when I was messing up, but about 4,000 bills are introduced every year in the legislature. So that's a lot to keep track of. And then only a few hundred of those actually get a vote, and even fewer become law. So there's a lot, especially right now in the legislature, there's a lot to sift through and to look at, and a lot of things that will actually never see the light of day, but are still, you know, still introduced and still interesting. And there's a lot of folks that are looking to try and make change in our state. Okay, let's see what happened here.
Good. Put your name in.
I guess I'm here. Okay, so a few people that came in very fast. We have Reese, Wendy, and Crystal leading us in the top three. Wendy, that's featured.
Yeah. I'll be fast.
I just barely beat.
What's barely. Yeah, since you didn't vote.
Yeah. There we go, okay. All right, our next question. How long is the 2023 legislative session? How many days? 65, 85, 105, or 135 days? Quick, get it. Okay, yay, a lot of you know. Look at you, okay. You're a lot more knowledgeable than the last group I had. That's all good. Good. Yeah, it's a 105-day session. We talk about in Washington how we have long sessions and short sessions. In the long session, the legislature is tasked with making big budget decisions and setting the budget for the biennium, which is the 2 years. So that's what they're up to right now. They're going to be there till mid-April.
How long are the short sessions?
60. Thank you. Fact checker in the room.
However, both of those sessions can go into extended. sessions.
Yeah.
Yes, although I think for the last 5 years, we've gotten it on time, or last 5.
Thanks to COVID.
Yeah, what else would I say about that? Yeah, the other thing to know is that's only part of the year, right? So your legislators we have what's called a citizen legislature, so they all have jobs, unless they're independently wealthy, that they do for the rest of the year. So they're often, in your community doing different work. Okay, I don't know why this is being so stubborn. Okay, back to our leaderboard. Less dramatic. All right, our top 3, Kayla at the top, Alana, who came in at the fastest with the correct answer, and Crystal.
Yes.
All right, what advocacy actions can charitable nonprofits take? Can y'all do legislative lobbying, like educating lawmakers? Elections, like working for or against legislation? Can you educate and inform? Meetings with voters? Okay, 3 seconds.
That was multiple choice, so start to click it down.
Oh. Awesome, yes, all of the above. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the rules associated with that, but for a lot of nonprofit folks, it's a lot more than they think they can do, right? So we want to make sure that y'all are as involved as possible.
This will happen as you continue. First, it's friendly.
Okay, number 1, Kelly Edwards. Well, came in with the fastest. Crystal still up there. I think that's gonna be hard to beat. And Reese on the 3rd place. Okay, a bill was introduced to establish the official Washington dinosaur. What dinosaur is it? And if anybody knows dinosaurs, that's the one that's on the screen. I think I still can't do this, but it is the dinosaur. This is it. So, you know what that dinosaur is? Yeah, so it's been a couple years now, but this was an idea from a class of 4th graders, and they continue to work hard to get their bill passed.
I'm really in trouble because I heard it on NPR yesterday and still got it wrong.
All right, let's see where we're at. Oh. Haley jumped into 1st place. And we have Kelly Edwards and Crystal, who I think are going to be hard to push away. All right. Last question. Which legislative district do you live in?
Has anybody seen my license plate?
I think it's me myself. Okay.
We are.
Yeah, this is a good one. It's good to know. Also, yes, we did have redistrict training recently, so it's a good time to recheck and make sure. And all of the answers are correct because I don't know where you live. Okay, and they are final winners. Okay, Kayla has taken it. Yeah.
I have a question. Does anyone mind if I take a few pictures while we're working today? Great.
Okay, Kayla's gonna get to choose first, and then Kelly Edwards and Crystal. Are all those folks in the room? Yeah,
Yeah.
two,
Great.
third person,
Yeah.
over here, perfect. Awesome. I'm gonna go and pass them down to your other winners. Sorry, thank you. So it's kind of, thank you all for participating in that with me, right? It's kind of nice to know some of those things, have a sense of what's going on, of how it all works, but also you don't need to have any special information or any special knowledge to advocate and talk to your legislators about what's important to you. The work that y'all do is really important. And your legislators need to hear about that and hear about the things that are getting in the way of you all doing your best work. Woohoo! It actually works now. Yeah, so a little bit about advocacy. Why do we advocate? Anybody, why do you advocate? Real answer. What was that?
Because you want to change.
Yeah.
For good. For everyone.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I'm a social worker, used to do, direct service work. And I think, yeah, it would just break me when I would see the same people coming in over and over again with the same problems. And feeling completely let down by our social service systems, right? And that problem is not, that's not going to be different if we don't change something at the systemic level. That's why I'm really motivated to do this work. And I think a lot of our missions, right, if we really want to transform our communities, and, as we say, put ourselves out of business, then I think what we have to do is think really holistically and systemically about what the change needs to be. When we're advocating, we can there are different areas that we can do it at, right? So we can talk about the budget, and having money to support programs, right? Sometimes a bill gets passed in the legislature, but it doesn't get any money attached to it, right? So it's an unfunded mandate, and that's what never happens because it doesn't have any money attached to it. So money makes the world go round. And then we can, I think a lot of us think of policy when we're talking about advocacy, talking with our legislators about specific bills, things like that, which we can definitely give feedback on. But there's also implementation. So even if you get a bill passed, how it gets implemented impacts a lot the actual, how it gets implemented impacts what you're really trying to do, right? I think when you have folks that are invested in what you're up to or don't really understand the intention of the policy, it can kind of throw off what y'all were trying to do.
I can give an example
Yes,
of that. So I worked with the Mockingbird Society for a while, and their focus is on improving foster care and ending youth homelessness. And we really had to always pay attention to policy implementation because the organization was very successful in bringing foster care involved youth to Olympia to talk about their priorities. I remember one year they were we were focused on sibling visits and having siblings be able to connect with each other. It was often it was sort of considered optional, and it was used as a disciplinary strategy to deny visits for non-compliant youth. And so the youth wanted to change that. Well, we did succeed in getting a law passed that guaranteed their right to visit with their siblings. But that didn't mean it started happening, right? Because there's a whole education process that had to happen for the social workers to understand that that was a right of the foster youth, and for the foster parents to understand it, and for things to start happening. And even for the youth to know their own rights in that situation. So, because you can't stop once you get the bill passed. You celebrate and then you keep working, I think, is usually the situation.
Yeah, I think change is hard, right? And folks don't just automatically do what it says. Yeah, so there are all these things that are part of advocacy. I think sometimes when we think of it, we think of kind of direct lobbying, or legislators, but it's all of these. So we're talking about educating and relationship building, researching different things, organize around it, coalition building, you know, or all of these things that kind of support the work that we want to do. Right? When we have relationships with our legislators, when we have a bunch of folks together that have a shared a common vision, maybe like the folks in this room, you're much more prepared to do a lot of that organizing work and push things forward.
And nonprofit 501c3 organizations can do all of these things. And everything on that spectrum up to lobbying is, you know, just totally unlimited, right? You only have some limitations and some guidelines around the actual lobbying piece, asking for a specific vote on a specific piece of legislation. So there's a myth out there, I think, that nonprofits can't advocate, in fact.
Yeah, and so lobbying, that little slice of things, that the thing that we do, I think, you know, when you think of lobbyists, there's like, I see this like smarmy guy in a, you know, like trying to peddle pharmaceutical stuff, you know, and taking legislators out to dinner and things. But lobbying is really, you know, it's anyone who's going into the Capitol, say, and asking for a vote on a specific bill, right? So a lot of folks are lobbyists. Laura and I are actually registered lobbyists in the state of Washington. So it looks, you know, it looks a lot different. And I think we, you know, there are folks that have a lot more money than we do and who have, you know, full-time people in Olympia. But we also need to be making sure that our voices are getting heard and having more folks down there. Yeah, because like I said earlier, you all have really important information about your communities and the work you do that legislators really need to hear.
Could I add something?
Yeah.
So there is a value to a lobbyist. I know at times they have a bad image, but there are good lobbyists and there are those who you learn you can't trust them. So the most important thing, just like in normal life, is does your word count? Can you be trusted? And you just learn through experience who you can trust. But they do have, and a legislator will ask a question, who's for this bill and who's against it? So you kind of grow into knowing what kind of questions to ask. But a good lobbyist will tell you that in advance before you even ask.
Yeah. And right, like lobbyists can be really great at kind of, yeah, knowing a lot about what's going on, who's where, why, how this bill is different from the last one. Just kind of, they have a lot of information and can be a resource for legislators, definitely. So this is kind of the rules we're talking about. So you can do all the advocacy stuff when it comes to this small piece of lobbying. There are a couple things to keep in mind. And there are different rules at the federal level and at the state level. At the federal level, lobbying is actually very specific. You have to have all three of these things. You have to be talking with the decision maker, attempting to influence a decision maker on an actual piece of legislation, and asking them to vote a certain way. So that's the only thing that we have limits on, that you can that we have limits on. And at the federal level, they're really looking for compliance. So they're saying, y'all are nonprofits, you need to be doing mostly the work that you do, and also you have the right to do some lobbying. Yeah, and it's, when they talk about, it's the federal rules, but it applies to all, federal, state, and local jurisdictions, so any lawmakers or decision makers. And then nonprofits can report that on their tax return. There's a special filing called 501H election that makes it very, very simple. And all you have to do or prove is that it's not a substantial part of your organization's activities. And it's typically, less than 20% of your budget. To think about your entire budget, entire staff, whatever you have going on, it would have to be getting up past that 20% limit to start to get to the spot, which I've never ran into a nonprofit that was anywhere close to that, because we are so we have a mission and we're so involved in our work, right? So often it's as much lobbying as you can find time to do. Yes. And then at the state level, Washington State is really interested in knowing who's impacting decision makers. And the scope, at the scope of the federal level is really about compliance. You're a 501(c)(3), you need to have these certain rules. At the state level, they just want to know what's happening. So there's no cap on what you're doing at the state level. It's just that you need to disclose it. Yeah, you need to report it. So, and the definition is a little broader. So it's attempting to influence a decision maker on any subject or legislation. So you could be talking, I could be talking about kind of the health of the nonprofit sector broadly, instead of please vote no on Senate Bill 5056. And both of those things would still be considered lobbying. So there's, we have a PDC, Public Disclosure Commission, but you only need to register with them if you're over the threshold of lobbying activity on 4 or more days during a 3-month period. So a lot of folks who go for like single lobby day or even a few lobby days don't actually need to report, but if you're going to be doing it regularly, it's good to just log on and learn about it. You can always over-report. You can register as a lobbyist and then just submit reports that don't have anything, monthly reports don't have anything on them because you've been doing lobbying that month. My go-to is to over-report, just make sure that everything is in there, but I imagine that most folks in this room are not going to get to that threshold of 4 more days during a 3-month period. So yeah, there are any questions on that? Okay. And there are things you cannot do. So as a 501(c)(3), we cannot do anything, we cannot endorse or support candidates for elected office, no partisan activity or giving any money or resources that would then be spent on partisan campaigns. So can't do things like pay for a fundraiser for your local legislator out of your 501(c)(3) money. You can't pay for registration for a partisan event or even let a candidate, if they're doing during their candidacy, use your office for a campaign event, right? Once they get elected, right, it's not as big of a deal because they don't have that campaigning hat on. They're now a legislator, and it's much easier to interact with them, and there are a lot fewer rules.
I think most people kind of understand this, and it's a pretty clear line of like, you can't support a candidate. I think where it gets muddy and where we get some calls sometimes is like, a lot of people like to invite your local legislators to your fundraiser event and have them show up and introduce them. Well, that's fine, but you would do well to invite all legislators, not just one party that you have more sympathy with personally, And if it's during election season, you should think twice about introducing them, because it's sort of an implied endorsement of, oh, we're so happy to have, you know, so-and-so with us today, and they're running for this office. So, I think it's best to avoid that during election season.
And legislators, if it's an election year, can't do that. You're even limited on the newsletter you send out if you are up for election.
So hopefully they know the rules anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah, especially folks who have done it a few times, they know what's going on. It's very clear when they kind of take off their campaign hat and put on their legislator hat.
Well, I can also say that at least the 12th district legislators always send me an email saying you won't receive my newsletter. So.
Yeah.
after election.
Exactly, yeah, it switches to the newsletter, then you can, they usually do campaign newsletter too. And if you, if you support candidates and want to get the campaign newsletter, that's something that would be best to do on your personal email account.
There's a question in the chat about if that is including all positions, all local judges, all any. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, all positions, but not issues, right? We're talking about people candidates, ballot initiatives you can support. And if you're working to, when you're working on a ballot initiative or something like that, you're talking to voters, the voters are considered the decision maker. So you're actually asking the decision maker for an actual, to pass whatever's up for whatever's on the ballot. Yeah, so I think this is, you can be involved with candidates, right? But you need to be involved on your own as an individual, not as an organization. So some things to consider. Am I going to an event on paid time, right? It's not gonna be a good idea to go to a candidate event on paid time, but in personal time, that's fine. Is the ticket that you're going to an event with, are you using your nonprofit money, or offering up event space, things like that. And then the contact information, am I representing myself as an agent of the organization? If you're deciding how to support a candidate, you want to use your personal email. If you were going to donate any money to a candidate, you would want to do that from your personal account. Yeah, and I just wanted to give an example. So these are our state policy priorities. And some of the things that we've done around government contracting, we just started a coalition with nonprofits around the state that are going to be working on that. For the insurance, there's a hearing happening right now. And we have for a couple board members, an equity ambassador, some other folks who are testifying to try to keep insurance affordable for nonprofits. And I think, Laura and I have been having conversations over and over with legislators about how do we invest in nonprofits and nonprofit workers so that our sector is sustainable. And so a lot of those, there are like different places on that advocacy thing we looked at spectrum. And yeah, only some of them are in that lobbying category that even needs to be kind of thought about. Yeah, and I get kind of overwhelmed sometimes when we talk about all the things that are going on in our community. And I think, there's many versions of this, but it always makes me happy because, collectively, right, we can do a lot more. I think at NOAA, that what we attempt to do is kind of create that structure so that we can advocate together and make more change. And I imagine that that's what we all can do here, right? In this room and with this coalition. So yeah, don't panic. we can do it together, right? Nobody's doing it alone. Would somebody offer to read this to us? Can we see it?
I will.
Yes.
arguably the most important public policies we have in the United States have come from nonprofit organizations lobbying for their causes. These achievements may be largely attributed to the strong leadership of executive directors and board members who knew that direct service alone would not change the flawed or missing public policies that contributed to the problems that organizations were trying to alleviate. David, Aaron.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I think that just hits for me, right? That the folks that work in nonprofits, the folks that we interact with across the state are super compassionate, smart, creative, resourceful folks. And so it would make a lot of sense that you all are going to come up with the best policy ideas and have the most passion and ability to collaborate to really get them through and get them done. Yeah, I think now we want to hear if y'all have any questions. It's also really an opportunity for any of y'all to share some things that you've been doing around advocacy or policy stuff. Yes.
I'm curious, have you seen a rise or decrease of nonprofits like overall joining NAWA, or just because like the pandemic has really shaken up things? So have you seen more or less nonprofits, coming online or having to shut their doors?
Yeah, it's a great complicated question. I've been at NAWA for 6 years, and we've seen kind of a slow but steady rise in our membership. And then when the pandemic first hit, we saw a big rise in our membership. And I think it's just because people are like, what are we gonna do? We need help, we need assistance kind of navigating all the new challenges. And so it was great to have more members come in. We also did everything we did for the whole community because it was an emergency. We needed to make sure people got the information, we needed to continue their services or take a pause in their services or whatever was appropriate. And actually we've seen a little bit of that pandemic rise go away. So we're back to more the steady course that we were on. And I would really welcome suggestions about how to really up our membership. It helps us when we're doing our advocacy work on behalf of nonprofits to say all these folks, we have about 650 members. I'd like to have 1,000 members. And nonprofits, though, they're a tough lot. They're very frugal, and but I want to invite all of you to check out. We do. Tiffany didn't talk too much about our learning program, but we really have an outstanding array of free and very low cost learning programs for nonprofit folks at all levels. So yeah, so our membership has kind of been a little bit like that. I would say it's tricky to know how many nonprofits close. We don't have good data on that. They just kind of go quietly into the night. Or I think what I've seen even more is they kind of go dormant. They don't close and go away per se. They just kind of get to this very low level of activity, like they're on life support for a long time. And so I am concerned, and I'm particularly concerned actually about the COVID cliff, because we've had a lot of relief money flowing into the sector, PPP loans, ERTC money, and that's going to go away. And also some of the special funding that people got during COVID has gone away. And so I think a lot of nonprofits are still kind of living off that money, and that there is going to be a problem, and it'll be exacerbated if there's a recession. And we know that both giving from individuals and volunteering is down substantially. And so how do we get people back engaged, back involved, and at the level of activity that they were doing before the pandemic? So it's a question for all of us. It's not easy.
I'm curious, what's the average lifespan for a nonprofit? Is it, do they go into this work thinking we're going to be here forever? Or is it more like we're going to do this until the goal is accomplished and then we close the doors? I'm curious, like, is it a 5-year lifespan, a year lifespan, or just until, indefinitely?
Yeah.
They say we were established in 2020, but we hope to continue until
I think think most of them go into it with the hope that they'll be around for a long time. Some never really catch on, so I think there's a, you know, a group of kind of small nonprofits, often with a single passionate founder, that they try to do something and they realize it's not as easy as they thought, and or get burned out in a few years. But most nonprofits actually have pretty long lifespans and tend to grow and establish themselves over time. And if they can survive that transition from, you know, just the founding group to, you know, more of an ongoing institution, then they tend to stick around. Awful lot of nonprofits in our community were founded, you know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, but there's always new ones coming on the scene. And I get a lot of questions about, don't we have too many nonprofits? We should have fewer, we should consolidate, that. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there are opportunities where organizations should merge together and do their work together. But I also think there's this piece where I think of the nonprofit sector as kind of the R&D sector for public good and for what the government will do in the future, right? And if you think of most government services, they were started as nonprofits, libraries, animal welfare, childcare, all the things. We started them, and then when there was sufficient public support, there was funding where there was public programs. So there's always new needs cropping up in the community. We also know that there are communities that, because of racism or other kinds of oppression, have not been served well by the kind of mainline nonprofits that have been around a long time. And so we need to, you know, those organizations need to adapt to be more equitable, and we probably also benefit from having new organizations that come up from the communities up there that are impacted.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Looks like we have a question from the chat. Caroline has her hand raised, so I'll let her ask the question.
Yeah, and feel free to punt this because I know you're from the Nonprofit Association of Washington, but we have really great for-profit and government partners that are part of our networks and coalitions. And I'm curious whether you would have any guidance for them.
Well, do you wanna say something, or? Okay, well, I have opinions about everything. I think the lines between the sectors have blurred a lot in the last, 20 years or so. It used to be a lot more distinct, people went into one sector. Now we're moving around, doing the work across different sectors. And so many people who maybe work at the Grant County Public Health today will work at a nonprofit next year, or whatever. I think we all need to work together. There are some different restrictions for people working in the public sector in terms of lobbying and what constitutes appropriate behavior. And I'm not an expert on that, but I'll just highlight that. And then private sector, let's get them involved in the social change that we want to see in the world. And they're welcome. And the rules for lobbying are the same at the state level, totally the same. And at the federal level, I just think there are fewer restrictions for private entities. So I'd say let's have them get involved.
And no one's allowed to leave Grant County Public Health. It's pretty sad.
Yeah. A lot better than. We train them, they take them.
I would say too, and my background really is early childhood, and I would say that the private sector has become more important, in particular in the field of early childhood. And so advocacy work isn't just with legislators or funding from the government. I mean, that's huge in early childhood, but it's also, I did a presentation with the chamber during the pandemic when everybody's trying to find childcare, right? And they think that the issue is building a childcare center, right? And then when I went into all of what really it costs to do early childhood and what all of those things, people just sat kind of in silence for a while. Like there weren't a lot of questions at first because there was so much information that the private sector didn't know. And I did the same thing with the port commissioners, and there were things that they were like, oh, there's not a simple answer, right? There's not a simple answer. So I do think that's an important piece, it's that education piece of everyone in a lot of the types of work that nonprofits are doing.
Yeah, and there's so much advocacy that can be done kind of in that in those relationships. I was doing childcare subsidies during the pandemic, running a childcare subsidy program that tried to assist families that are left out of our state program. And the counties and cities that we were partnering with had very little knowledge about how it worked and who does the childcare and where kids are actually at, and what constitutes the learning environment, all of those things. And so that's just another example of like the knowledge that folks have when they're doing the work, and the way that we need to partner with government and for profit to make those services better, and do what works. Right.
And companies are dealing more with mental health and all of those kind of things where they need the services of the people that are sitting in this room, right?
Yes.
I wanted to share that in the past, Doug Head, who was the former director of Children's Home Society, he always, prior to the legislative session, would invite the local legislators and then have all of the nonprofits and also like the educational service district all together. And we as legislators would sit and listen. That was so effective because everybody's busy, but to do it all at once, I could see the ACH facilitating something like that in the future because individual meetings, there's only so much time in a legislator's life. But to all come together and you profit by, like if Nancy spoke of, she got the expertise in this, somebody else might add something. That was really very valuable.
It was actually done by the Coalition for Children and Families, where he was one of the founders of that group, and that was done for many, many years. And then the coalition has actually kind of, it's not there anymore because it was run all on volunteers. And now the work of the ACH and OBOF and the chives that are going on really have picked up that work. So it made sense to move some of that work in that direction. But yeah, the forum it's always been real. And actually it stopped at the pandemic. It stopped at the pandemic. So it's something I really feel strong about bringing.
Yeah.
It was
Meg,
really.
I just want to be mindful of time. We have, I was gonna say, let's do
Yeah,
one more,
yeah,
and
absolutely,
then, we can,
Well, this is actually kind of related to that last point, which was, I think for some of you with more experience, we had heard, that the idea of a lobby day, in the middle of February or something, when it's, you're in the middle of session, it's really busy, that is maybe not the best time to influence folks. And, with this 4,000 bills that are introduced and, a few hundred that get moved forward, we've been advised that the relationship building and conversations you can have in the fall or sometime before session can be some of the more impactful times. And I was just wondering if you had any reflections on our experience with that.
absolutely. I think, if you go and just hang out at the legislature, like, people are walking and they're talking while they walk and they have, and they're going here and there and everywhere. And so I think it's the same as like, if I'm really involved in something and you're trying to talk at me at the side, right, I'm gonna get like 10% of what you say. But if I'm not as busy, right, off session, we can sit and have a conversation. I can think a little more about it. And I think that's when you can really build those relationships. It's really hard to build a relationship in 10-minute increments when someone else is, when they have all these other things on their mind.
I think it depends a lot also, are you trying to educate them and make them aware of your issues, or do you have a specific legislation that you're trying to steward through committees and get passed? In which case you have to get involved during the session.
Yeah.
But and the relationship's still going to help you even in that scenario.
Yeah, I think the relationship is kind of the groundwork, and then as things come through, right, like it does make a lot of sense to bring a bunch of people if there's a, if there's a committee hearing, we have a committee hearing today, we have 4 people that are testifying remotely. doing live testimony, and I think that's, it's important that legislators know what's important to you and, you know, what your role is in the community and why it's important. So, yes, it does make a lot of sense to, it's all the time. I think people don't think about it as like a year-round endeavor, but it really is. And I think we're gonna take like a three-minute stretch break, and then we're gonna come back and do our panel. Yeah, thank you all.
How you doing? Good. How are you? See you at the end. Good to see you.
The whole group.
We are just getting our feelings and we have okay, very well. That is my going, so. Because I'm recording some meal to be here at the official meeting. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm small. You're like, appreciate that. So there's literally like, is that like, I'm going on campus. Yeah, I've heard of it. But so far, the people that. Right? But I think it's like, when you can't, just do it.
And we can look at that. Yeah.
But I just want to see.
Yeah. Let's keep things moving, and I'm just gonna be, provide some light moderation here. And, we wanted to hear from some folks in the community that are doing advocacy and have been in the legislature. So, thank you, Alana and Linda and Representative Steele for joining us virtually. We really appreciate it. And. Yeah, I apologize. So, and Nancy is here as well, so that's great. And I thought I would just ask each of you to just take maybe 2 minutes or so to just tell us a little bit about how you got your start in advocacy and maybe a highlight or two of things that you've worked on or advice that you have for folks here in the room just to start us off. So, Representative Steele, why don't we start with you online? Oh, you're here.
There we go. There we go. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Great to see everyone virtually. Thanks for allowing me to meet this way. It's been a very busy start to the session in Olympia, and things are moving very, very quickly over here. I got my start in advocacy in my role as executive director for the Chamber of Commerce in Lake Chelan. Obviously, small business issues come up again and again in the legislature. And we were over kind of consistently meeting with our friend Senator Parlett and Representative Kandata and Representative Armstrong at the time, and just trying to make sure that as they were working through the legislative process, they understood. And we always had really, of course, great representatives, but they understood, what their decisions meant for our small business communities. And then, of course, moving into city council, advocating for city issues, and just being engaged as a citizen, I think was really important to me always. But I think in the 12th legislative district, and Senator Parlett can weigh in on this too, but we've always just had really engaged community members who serve us in Olympia. And they were always really good about coming back and relaying what work they were doing, and they just made the advocacy really sort of effortless in the 12th legislative district anyway. And so we've hoped to continue that tradition in terms of good community collaboration and work.
Thank you so much. That's great. Linda, would you like to tag on to that?
Sure, so, I guess it's my personality to always speak up and be involved, and I don't usually do anything unless I have passion, and I try to be really educated. And I always, as a legislator, said, I'm only as effective as how you educate me. There is really a role for everybody to educate. It's never my plan to run for office. I did run as a school board member, as a write-in candidate at the last minute. The primary was already done. In those days, you could do that. You couldn't do it anymore, but I was mad. And you shouldn't, I found out that they didn't have phonics in the Chelan school system. And my oldest was in kindergarten. My class didn't have phonics, my sisters did. She was a much better speller. So I just said, would you write my name in? I want phonics as one of the choices to learn to read. Believe it or not, I lost by 1 vote. Okay? But the school district got phonics, so I felt like I had won. And then 4 years later, the fellow I was running against, who I had nothing against him, said, Linda, I'm not going to run again. I want you to run for the school board. So when on the school board, one of the things I advocated for was to change the basketball schedule, because these kids from Chelan were traveling in the middle of the week, but the kids from Kashmir, who I later found out arranged the schedule through WIAA, always got the benefits of the best schedules. So I'm telling you, you learn a lot. You got to be educated. And then as far as being effective, running for the legislature, never my plan. People talked me into it, and I wasn't the chosen candidate, but I won, and I never had an opponent again for 20 years, and I'm kind of proud of that. But I think it's, for me, all customer service. I earned my way through college as a waitress, being a pharmacist, customer service, being a legislator, customer service. That's what it's all about. If you are an effective legislator, Representative Steele is very effective. We are so lucky he could participate. He sits on a couple of budget committees. He's ranking on capital budget. That's really important. Find out what committees your legislators sit on, because that's key.
So my story maybe is familiar starting place to a lot of us in the room, but I ran actually Room 1 for 8 years, which is an organization in Twist that serves all parts of Convening County. And the last couple of years that I was at Room 1, I'm born and raised in Eastern Washington. One of the things that we noticed that a lot of folks are coming in the door who worked 40 hours a week and still couldn't make ends meet. And social services are problems much bigger than social services. When you can work hard and contribute in ways that you can to your community and still not have enough to pay for your kids' education, or their childcare, or get from homeless people. I mean, I wouldn't put them. So the last couple of years we were there, we started talking a lot to representatives, because it was clear that rural Washington needs tectonic shifts. Like the ground is eroding beneath the Okanagan County, and it's eroding beneath rural communities all across the state of Washington. When we talk to a lot of our representatives, some of them are incredibly responsive. Honestly, Representative Steele is a great example of that. And we noticed continually that the gap between what everyday people were calling for to build a better future and the legislation that our representatives were working on was pretty immense, even if the legislation was responsive to what people were needing. So I left the organization and we started Rural People's Voice, was really looking at how we close the gap between the folks who represent us and the needs of everyday folks, and also turn the power back over to everyday people who can work at all sorts of levels that help us win things like better childcare, or help us win things like better jobs, or help us win things like the ability to purchase our mobile home, and bring our representatives into that equation, and also encourage our representatives to continue to represent us as just with everyday folks in Central Washington. And I agree with Senator Parlett and Representative Steele. We've actually got, relative to the rest of rural Washington, we've got really responsive legislators for the most part who do want to hear from us. I think the challenge for us is how we can come together and have enough power collectively to actually move forward the big tectonic shift that rural Washington really needs.
I got involved in advocacy back in I was trying to remember the actual dates, but it's around late 70s, early 80s, when I was the director of a campus childcare at Everett Community College. And at that time, comparable work came into effect. And so all college employees were put on what was called all state employees were put on what's called the comparable work scale, and looking at comparable pay for what the work that people did. And what happened is that the legislature, when it passed, gave the community colleges funding to support those increases. But childcare didn't receive funding because we were supposedly, we were self-pay, right? Like we were supposedly that way. The truth is, most campus childcare centers are subsidized by the student activities. For student activities typically supports them. So they never pay for themselves. And so there was an organization called the Campus Childcare Coalition, and they began to work with the legislature, and that was the first time I ever testified in front of the legislature. And I actually had, and I will never forget this, because after that I figured I could figure out how to do just about anything and say anything. Because I had a legislator say to me while I was testifying, so you're now telling us that the legislature needs to pay colleges to educate 3-year-olds. And it was like, oh, but I just took a deep breath. I looked at him and said, I guess I know. Well, I guess I am. I guess I am, and he knew that. And then I went into, how 3-year-olds will become college students and some of that stuff, but it was like, I didn't know how to answer it. So I figured after being challenged like that, I could probably go before them and say just about anything. So, yeah, that's how I got started.
That's great. Thank you all. And I'm wondering if you could share something that either a particular challenge, a story like that, something that you went through and came out the other side in terms of an advocacy shift that you wanted to see, or just what has surprised you the most about your life as an advocate and or elected official. Is there anyone that would like to start?
When you were talking about that, what came to mind to me was something that you were saying earlier today. The advocacy that I do with our legislators, like representatives, so when I came to your office, actually those advocacy days were and continue to be really fun for me, just to be in Olympia and to be around all the stuff that's going on and to be able to talk to the legislators. But what came to mind to me is once the legislation has passed, the advocacy that still needs to be done. Like for me, it's been mostly with DCYF, right? Like how those things get implemented and the mistakes that get made in implementation that the legislature gets blamed for. Really. And it goes both ways too, right? But I mean, the DCYF gets stuck in some kind of laws too, that they can't implement stuff that providers think they should be able to implement. But that implementation piece is, the advocacy doesn't stop. It really is also having relationships with people who make some of those decisions and getting on advisory committees that make those decisions because yeah, anyway, so that's what came to mind to me, that work that for me it feels like year round because I'm always trying to make sure that what was decided actually happens the way it should happen.
So I'd like to just add a little bit, in the past, before I was a legislator, my first year in office was 1997, the legislature gave away rulemaking and they gave it to the agencies. And lots of times the end result of implementation is not what the intent of the legislature was. And I've always felt we're kind of out of balance because if the legislature would take a little bit more responsibility, we wouldn't have over 4,000 bills every year. We would be more careful and make sure that the intent actually gets implemented.
And I would just piggyback on that exact same thing. That's exactly right. The challenge as a legislator, we think we're putting money, for example, the budget committees that I serve on, I think we're putting money to a specific cause or a need in my district or across the state. And we find out that money wasn't actually used the way that the legislature intended it to be used. And so it didn't solve the problem and it didn't get to where it needed to go. And so that's a huge frustration when you come back in the next budget cycle and you say, well, we thought we handled that. And they say, oh, no, it never actually worked out that way. So there's a little bit of catching up that we're always doing here because laws that we pass and budgets that we pass tend not to be exact, because these agencies are responsible for carrying out what they believe our intent to be. It leaves that gap, as Senator Parlett mentioned, it leaves that gap of intention to solution. And it's a frustrating thing as a legislator.
So I could give what I think is an example of that. I don't know from the legislative perspective if this is an example, but in the early learning world, this is definitely an example. Is that there was funding provided for mental health services in school districts. And there are school districts that hired more police officers with that money. So there is now a bill going into the legislature trying to say, no, this money was for mental health counseling and more of those types of support and not for more police officers in our school. So I think that's kind of an example of how that
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Makes me think of one shot I hadn't thought about talking about this, but I've always thought about when I was a decade ago, that if you can get a legislator to turn towards your priorities, it's like a golden ticket, right? You can get them to understand what you need, know what your priorities are. That's how we move mountains. But every legislator, right, is part of this. It's part of this. There's part of the system. There's only competing interests and values, and that's one of the things we value most about a good legislator, right? Is that they they balance the interests and values of their community. And it's not a golden ticket to just talk to a representative and say, we want to put this policy forward. Sometimes it doesn't happen, sometimes it doesn't come out the way you think it's gonna come out. And we see that cycle, this idea that one person can change everything for us, repeated in our electoral systems, right? You get behind this one candidate or this one person. But I think the way we actually build real community change is by having the legislator be one tool we have at in our disposal, trying not to use it. Yeah. Tool belt, thanks, Sarah. And to really both win those policies and ensure they land in the community, we actually have to bring the community with us, right? So when we advocate for something, when we push something forward, it has to come from the community and with the community, and the community is as accountable for that policy as any other legislators. There's not to talk too much, but there's one piece of legislation that's coming up this year, I think is really exciting, to answer your other facilitation question around home weatherization. So our organization has knocked on probably 500 doors in Okanagan and Sheboygan County, largely in South Wenatchee, and had really deep listening conversations, what people are really up against. So we've often seen people struggling with homes that now can think about fire, they think about heat, they think about the cold. It's clear that we need a massive investment in weatherization in rural Washington. And having gone through so many cycles of feeling like, oh, how do you fix Medicaid reimbursement? Oh, how do you get healthcare with people? This stuff is complicated. And right now there's a massive bill, a $46 million bill to get a bunch of homes weatherized in areas like where I live and where most of us live. It's in similarly $80 million bill for heat pumps. So and heat pumps again can keep your house cool, keep it warm. I think those are really exciting things to be able to see the issues that everyday folks, working families genuinely are facing, start to show up increasingly in the legislature. That's small bill, I think that's true.
Great, and that makes me think of another issue that comes up in advocacy is you have an issue you want to work on, you have to figure out who the people are that can actually make that change. And it could be at the local level, it could be at the state level, it could be at the federal level. I mean, we've had some issues that nonprofits deal with that require federal change. And of course, that's pretty hard to, we work in coalition with other states and you can make that happen. But weatherization is an interesting one to track where the resources might be available. But there are some interesting opportunities too, because there's federal funding coming into our state for certain things, and a lot of it actually goes basically unclaimed. Because nonprofits actually don't have the expertise to necessarily know how to grab that money and use it in the community. So I just think that's an interesting question of who can help you the most with that. And you also may find, in other parts of the state, I've heard people say, my legislator just won't give me the time of day. They don't feel aligned with my issue. Well, then maybe you do need to talk with other legislators outside of your district as well. I think it's always good to keep engaging with your local legislators. They represent you, but you can broaden that a little bit.
I can give you an example of a bill that started here at the local level. The county associations sort of choose somebody to be the person to go to Olympia. In this case, it was the person who was the head of our regional support network, but she also led and still does the developmentally disabled office, which is part of Chelan and Douglas County. At any rate, there were many people who are disabled, but they're still employable, but it's very, very expensive. So the ultimate goal that was being proposed was that there would be state funding so businesses could be subsidized a little bit to hire people with developmentally disabled issues. So I was asked to sponsor that bill and got bipartisan support on the bill. And in the end, the key was getting it in the state budget. And luckily I sat on the Ways and Means Committee. I was in the minority, which I often was, but I got enough support just by standing outside on the sidewalk with a House member there. Representative Cody happened to show up. Here was Senator Kaiser, Senator Murray. I said, you guys, I need to talk to you. So that was just an example of taking advantage of the moment, getting them together, getting a commitment to get it in both budgets, and it passed. And the exciting thing about it, it was Advocacy Day, that's what we're talking about a little bit. And somebody asked me to go out and speak to the DD community. They were sitting in the Capitol, but on the steps. And then they ended up in the chambers. And so somebody who was the lobbyist for that group came to me and said, Senator Parlett, that bill is on the floor roster. Do you think you could get the floor leader to move it up so it could be voted on? So luckily, again, I'm in the minority, but I had a good relationship with the floor leader. She bumped it up and we voted on it. It still touches my heart. And I'm still emotional. Talk about this. At any rate, the bill passed and they all stood up in the chambers, and that's illegal, and shouted and but the lieutenant governor, Brad Owens, did not gavel him down. So that's just a story on its own. And I cry every time.
I think that's a great example. I really appreciate everyone. I apologize, I have to run to another meeting, but I just want to leave you with the fact that your advocacy does matter. And educating us, as Senator Parlett mentioned, is super important. I mean, you are part of the collective that helps us understand all of these issues that come before us. And if you don't continue to advocate, if you don't continue to email and call, you know, sometimes that stuff gets lost. But really it is folks like you who are doing the hard work that keep us on the straight and narrow and allow us, you know, to stay up to speed on the things that are happening locally. It's so important. We could not do the job without advocates. You would not be an effective legislator if you didn't listen to your advocates. And so I just encourage you to continue the work that you're doing. It makes a difference. And, you know, there's never too many phone calls, never too many emails. We really need it, and we appreciate it. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all in person very soon.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Great. Well, maybe we'll just do a little closing round with any advice you have for folks that maybe have done less advocacy and feel a little intimidated by it. What advice would you give folks?
I think what has already been said, if you can get to know your legislator, not during session is helpful. And if they know whatever issue you're particularly interested in. Another thing I would tell you is it's really important, once you find out the key legislators and what committees they sit on, like Representative Steele being ranking on the capital budget in the House, but he's also on appropriation. A good relationship with their legislative assistant is really important. As you know, Shiloh was my legislative assistant for 10 years. And if she would know the issues too. And if there was something really important and very timely, she would let me know. So Senator Parlett, so-and-so is walking with you to committee. Because I would listen. I mean, every minute is so valuable. And legislative assistants can open the door at the right time, even if it's 5 minutes, but you have no idea how important that can be. Timing's everything.
Senator Hoffman hiring the legislative.
Well, I'm like, I'm civil.
No, that's fair. You know, the thing that my mind is the democracy, right? So we've elected these folks to represent us, which means that we all, every single one of us, regardless of if we voted for them or not, that we live on this land, we deserve to be talking to these people and making decisions on behalf of our families. And in my experience, which really brought me personally into this work, the entities who tend to advocate are usually the most politicized around an issue. So they understand these legislative pathways. They often represent a small section of our community. That's not always true. But the people who are kind of most experienced and have the know-how of how to talk to legislators often have gotten there in a path that's not the same as most working class people. So I guess I bring that up to say that the more we can turn towards the people who make rural communities work, who make Chelan County work, and reinforce to them that they deserve to live a good, healthy life, just like anybody else. And that their representatives are here to work for them and with them. I think the healthier democracy, but also the more possibility we have of really getting places like rural Washington back onto the track where we don't fear whether or not our kids can buy a house in the future, or fear whether or not our kids are going to be able to have a living wage job. So again, I just think advocacy is everybody's. It's not just a small portion of the population, and it's not just people who are lobbyists, and I agree with you, lobbyists. So I'm a bag of lobbyists. We do need them as well.
I would add something about, you may not realize how important you are because you are from a rural area. I'll give you an example. I'm still involved. It's called the chart model, and it has to do with the proposed payment system for rural hospitals. I still am involved with the hospital association meetings locally. We have a meeting on Thursday. I participate by Zoom, but the executive director of our group, not executive director, but the leadership of our group, somebody from the healthcare authority from the other side of the mountain facilitated it. John Chapman, the executive director of the ACH, was co-chair with the state medical director. But just talking to Teresa, who kind of worked with the federal government and so forth, and saying, you know, I thought I understood rural. I didn't understand rural. These people, they don't realize there's not an Uber in every corner or whatever. I mean, you have a real value in just letting people know what it's like, whether it's Grant County, Okanagan County, you live in Republic, you have a value that you may not realize.
Both of theirs gave me a whole bunch of ideas. But I actually, the part about kind of having a relationship with the aides is really important. And those forums that you were talking about, that happened because in contact, because I set it up a couple years in a row, contacting the aides, and they talked to each other and they figured out how everybody could get to the table at the same time.
Right.
So that was important. The other thing I will tell you, at the federal level, when I went to the federal level I went to Washington, DC, and I was disappointed because I thought I was going to get to Dr. Patty Murray, which in early childhood, she is, you know, she's our queen. But when I met her aide and we talked with that aide knew so much. She knew so much, and she had studied early childhood, and she was like asking amazing questions. So it was at that level, you know, that level, they have aides that are assigned to certain topics that really are very good at it. I think that's important. The other thing I think that's important is what's happening locally. How many of you know who your port commissioners are, who your county commissioners are? Those are people who make major decisions about what happens in this community. I don't know if you even know that commissioners are who decides who's on the library board, right? So there are all kinds of, at our local level, advocacy that's a good way to start getting in there, and that, because you might find out that it's your neighbor, the port commissioner, right? And a lot of people, when I actually, but when I tell people that, people go, like they don't even know what port commissioners do, right? So I think learning more about those kind of things in the community and what, because there's a lot of money that flows through that way, and lots of decisions that are made at a local level that are important.
I think that's a great note to end the panel on. Thank you all for your insights. And I would say, just add that, you know, legislators, and I'm so glad we've got two here with us, are real people, you know, they're people in our communities. And so it's good to engage them as such, and just really have authentic conversations. And I think they really appreciate hearing from the people who are directly affected by the issue. It's, you know, and sometimes I go in and I need to bring people with me who are on the ground, you know, experiencing whatever challenges are affecting small nonprofits, because they can hear that more, it's more authentic. It really comes across, and your story about people with DD at the Capitol, you know, you wouldn't think of people with DD as the best advocates necessarily, you know, but they are, of course they are. They are living it, and it's very real. So.
I just want to help clarify something that is so confusing. You heard Representative Steele call me Senator Parlett, whatever. So when I started to work at the ACH, it was finally done. What am I supposed to call you? And so if you are, if you've been a senator and you don't run for another office, you keep that name till you die. And so in formal meetings, like if there's any state agency people around, they will always call me Senator Parlett or whatever. So I always told my staff, just call me Linda. But if you're in a meeting where you'll see county commissioners or others, and they call me that, that's why. So it's just a little 101, because I didn't know that. Also, lastly, all House bills start with the number 1,000. All Senate bills start with the number 5,000. You probably already knew that. I didn't know that.
I think those are gonna go in the trivia.
Read, and I don't know if this is true, but I read that the Senate, the rest of your life is the only title that actually is in law that way. Like even the President of the United States.
I didn't know.
Even the President of the United States, even though we continue to call them president, it is not in law that we do that, but senators, it is in the law that for the rest of their life.
Well, interesting, because I still work with our former governor, Dan Emmons, who is probably 98 now, and he was our United States Senator, but I still call him governor. So I don't.
And right. Does anybody have a question? Do you have any questions from the audience, for these folks? Any burning questions? Okay, just want to make sure.
Might take a moment to plug at the February Okanagan meeting. All the sector leaders are going to be talking about their legislative priorities and talking about what pieces of legislation passed this year that have affected Okanagan County. So we're talking about childcare, hospital, and a local way. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about that, Melinda? Or if that's okay. I mean, I would say, like, when I think of ACH and like holistic health, and my organization is similar, you know, we're thinking about community well-being and, you know, thriving communities. It's just about everything on the legislative priorities, and we're getting invited like every day to advocate for somebody, you know, all our sister organizations, platforms, and like, we're just trying to make some decisions about priorities so that we can be effective at moving something actually forward. And I guess any reflections on how you make this really hard to, you know, is it housing, is it childcare, is it mental health, is it addiction, and you know, it's all the things. And luckily we have so many of us who care about all those things that can champion them. So any thoughts on prioritization?
You know, when I would take this opportunity to feed through a little bit of a chai call to the NCACH, which is that, I mean, what Kelly's reflecting, there's so many ways in which public policy can support rural communities. And if it's just the hospital district entity by itself, it's just the childcare, it's just a housing entity by itself, feel by themselves. So we're often thinking a lot about how can the NCACH help amplify some of that advocacy work, But then, gosh, to answer your question of what priorities would be, I mean, I find myself thinking about what these representatives are most responsive to, and hearing that when they hear from people who are most affected by the issues. That's kind of where I would think about starting. What issues do we know most intimately? And then what are other issues that we have one firepower to? Like, where do we get to show the numbers that are useful? I'd be curious, Senator Parlett, if that resonates with what you think a nonprofit organization would be most strategic in there.
I mean, I think your role is just to educate, you know, and know that if it's going to take money to whatever you're advocating for, yeah, I don't know, I can just see, like I said, it's so valuable the way it used to be on the group that Nancy, you talked about, where sometime in the session, not December, it's too late. I just remember taking part when I was a freshman, because my two seatmates, Senator Seller and Speaker Clyde Ballard, weren't cooking Thanksgiving dinner, nor were they fixing Christmas dinner like a woman does, and all those things you need to do. So I said, let's bump these meetings up early. So we tried to do them early on in November, and that was very helpful to educate. I'm not sure what your exact question was.
I think if the nonprofits, I mean, so many of these public policy pieces affect the health of the community. So how can a nonprofit what helps a nonprofit make decisions about the legislation or the advocacy that it is best positioned to advocate for? The legislation that it's best positioned to advocate for. Like, do you show up on 30 committees? Do you invest most deeply in the 3 that you know you've got people to come to who can tell personal stories?
Yeah, I think you have to narrow your focus. You can only do so much, and that focus may vary from year to year because issues change, and some things take a long time. I'm not, having grandkids now, and schools are learning about different things, and once in a while they say, well, I'm going to be a legislator or whatever, and I'm just saying, get a skill first. You will be you will be more effective as a legislator. So I'm an orchardist, I'm still an orchardist, I meet a payroll. I know that when these things come, what's the fiscal? I mean, you got to pay for it. That's number one. Number two, I'm a pharmacist. I was the only pharmacist in the legislature. There are more now. It didn't matter if there was a Democrat or a Republican. If it was a pharmacy issue, they would always say, what does Senator Parlett think? And that was so much fun for me because those representing the drug companies, and they'd come to me, I would know as much as them, if not more. And so I would ask questions that nobody ever asked them before. And they just say, you know what? You just taught us something. This bill's not ready yet. And that was the bill, biologics. I don't know, you've heard on television, Humira, that's a biologic. So they're not the same as generics. They're a different size molecule, but they're comparable. We didn't have any state law for biologics. And so it probably was 4 years. No, it's not ready. And finally, I did sponsor it. But we put a 5-year limit on it to go back and look at it. So I'm no longer in the legislature. But last year I said to Representative Cody, it's 5 years. Did you go back and look at that? Oh, I totally forgot. So that's another thing too. Who's keeping track of the history? Staff changes and stuff like that. But so your role never changes. Keep educating.
That's the other thing that I would say is, that's why I think coalition building is so important.
Totally.
I know you're doing this in Okanagan and we haven't moved that far in Chelan and Douglas yet, but when the Coalition for Children and Families was in effect, we had subcommittees. And so the early learning folks, that was their own subcommittee, and we brought the early learning issues to the table, and yet we did all the work when it came to the advocacy piece, right? So the whole group was educated about what we were doing, but that was our, so it was on the legislative priority, but there was a group that actually took care of that. And so everybody didn't have to be thinking, and I know up in Okanagan, the coalition has been able to, so there are 10 regional early learning coalitions, and the one in North Central Washington has been able to give funding to each of the counties to be able to do their own smaller coalitions, and they have chosen to be really connected well to the CHI up in Okanagan County. So you have a group of folks there that are the experts in early learning, right? That can bring all of that to you, and you don't have to go, you just support what they organized, right? Because they're the ones that are doing the work.
And when you're frontier, like Okanagan County, it's survival. You have to be together, but you become so effective. That's something that Teresa, running the chart model, she just said, I had no idea the value of rural. I mean, that's why I keep saying, you have no idea how valuable you are.
I agree. Well, that's a good note to end on, I think. Thank you all for sharing your expertise.
We had, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Question online, Don?
Yeah, it's going off of the same thread. I know questions come up about NCHH. I'm really curious about how the nonprofit association manages working with partners that have such a variety of priorities and how you guys identify your priorities specifically. And then, one thing I think I've just learned in my really early dipping my toe in the water of talking to legislators is it seems like you have to be concise, know directly your issue, and not try to provide too much detail or try to cover too many issues at once, because they have so much on their plates that you want to get a simple message across and help them understand that message in a clear way versus trying to give them every single detail out there. But I'm also curious, Washington nonprofit wise, how you guys seem to manage this and support your partners in advocating for their specific needs while identifying your priorities.
Sure. Yeah, so I think a lot of this is making me think about organizations and people that have different advocacy niches and personal experience and stories, and how it makes a lot of sense for those folks to lead in that area. And so the area that we've taken on to lead is issues that affect nonprofits broadly in the sector. And so some of those, some of them are not everyone, but they have to do with, how respected nonprofits are, how much liability nonprofits take on, how we support nonprofit workers, kind of things across the board. And we come to those because there actually are a lot of those issues as well. And we come to those by working with, we have an advocacy work group that's open to nonprofit folks from across the state. We have a policy committee that's from our board that helps us with that. We take it to staff, and and then we share it out again with folks in the community and get feedback on what's important to nonprofit folks, and it kind of continues from there. I think the other piece is, I think we want to help all y'all advocate better for your missions. And so I think that's, kind of what we're doing here today, right, is getting you a little more familiar with everything, talking about strategies, having folks here that know, that can give us those. But we wouldn't necessarily, sign in on like a very specific housing bill, although we do have folks that, are very specific. And sometimes I sign in as me, not we, representing our.
Actually, I have something. I wonder if you could tie it, I forget what it's called, but it's not a 501c3, it's an advocacy organization.
Yeah, so they're 501c4s.
Right. And so that in early learning, we have the Early Learning Action Alliance, which does that work. And so many of us let them do that stuff, right? So we can get our ideas across to them, and then they can do that bigger picture.
Yeah, and it is, something that's came out of the pandemic, I think is really cool, that it's easy to sign in on bills. So something's coming up in committee, you can sign in pro, con, or other. You can provide written testimony on there. And then if you want to do live remote testimony, you can also do that. So I think it's helpful when other folks kind of know and can say, like I sent out our folks this morning sample testimony where they could adapt it to kind of, exactly what they want to talk about, our talking points, what exactly the bill is, why it doesn't work. They have all of that and don't have to do any of that background work, but they know that they want to support what we're up to. So I think that's, part of the power of coalitions and of having folks that know a lot about their issue.
501c4s are awesome. We're a 501c4, our own was we also have a 501c3 that's connected to us. 501c4s can do some really fun stuff, like including being able to pick candidates or support elections. It can't be their primary purpose. It can also lobby without limitation, which is fun because we just have the C4 that has these unlimited, this incredibly high ceiling in terms of what it can do. Their mission and purpose starts to shift. Like, oh, how are we going to build political power in this? Or how are we going to do policy in this? In addition to nonprofits that are trying to do public policy, they're also trying to make sure people have caregivers, make sure that food banks are open. So it's just, in our experience, we we actually lead with the 501c4, but we know what folks to 501c4s, and the C4s like. So, it's a separate focused entity that's going to collaborate with the 501c3.
And then folks who get really deep into advocacy also start a PAC. So they have a C3 doing the sort of educational charitable work, and C4 doing a lot of advocacy. And a PAC, a political action committee, can actually give money to candidates. And so that's sort of all the different tools in your toolbox that you have as a nonprofit.
And thankfully in Washington, we already have a lot of 501c4s that are working on a lot of issues, right? So we can use some of the things that some of the materials they're creating, some of the messaging frameworks they're creating, use those in our advocacy as well.
What I love is every Friday, I have throughout the whole legislative session, I get a half-hour phone call where they just give you a synopsis of what happened. And it's like, good, I don't have to read all of it. Nice.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, having been a member of NAWA before, they are such a great resource to connect you. Like, if you're like, I don't know if my issue has a 50C4, they can help connect you, give you resources, and like those ED coffee hours and things like that, like, are just so great, and are a great way to connect across the state on your issues.
Yeah, we of course would love to have you as members, but even if you don't want to be a member, maybe visit our website and sign up to get email notifications about upcoming events. Give you one example, we have a quarterly rural nonprofit gathering coming up on March 9th, and we're going to have the Northwest Public Broadcasting come and dialogue about rural news coverage and what they're doing and what's missing, and how to tell a good story or pitch a story to a reporter. So there's just a wide variety of things happening, and we would just welcome you to join in and on any of it. So I know there's a couple wrap up tasks for the meeting. I'm sorry we ran way over on the panel, but it's a lot of fantastic information. So I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just real quick. Thank you all. I felt excited about that. And like we got some insider information. I hope you all feel that way too. We'll just do that. So I'm gonna pass these around, and these just get you thinking about what is your issue? What are you you and your organization most poised to work on? What are you most passionate about? What do you have personal experience with? And then thinking about some of the things that we just talked about, of like, who has the power to change that? At what level, right? Who are they? What information might we need?
And I think the part of the reason we were asked to come is to kind of spark your own dialogue about what this group might want to work on together, what your priorities collectively might be. So one idea is take this sheet away, make some notes for yourself about what you care about, come back at a future meeting and really talk about where there's some synergy for you all.
Yeah, and I think that's our same phenomenal one, the conversation to have over lunch of how y'all can collaborate on moving forward for some regional advocacy and policy work. Yeah. Do we want to? Yeah, I think we wrap up things we need to do.
I think I just put the reflection questions for those of you that are joining online. So that's what our handout has. Sorry, I didn't include a handout for you online folks, but Morgan, can you wrap up?
Yeah, just thank you so much for all of our guest speakers today. And Mariah and I are going to work together. We'll upload this meeting to our YouTube. So if there's any information that you wanted to revisit or just listen to again, we'll have that available. And then we'll also follow up with some resources for you guys to have in that email as well. And we do have a few topics picked out for our upcoming partner convenings later this year. But if this is an area of interest that some of you are really passionate about and would like to see us kind of build on from this at another partner convening, we'd